canto a mi estado, mi tierra natal.
This dedication is about honoring our past, and it's about celebrating current day Albuquerque and really celebrating our future. Hopefully 100 years from now, somebody will put the new center of the city in at that point in time.
Albuquerque, in the land of romance, where gay señoritas sing love songs and dance. Albuquerque, where I gave her my heart.
This project's about history, it's about time, and it's about space. It's also about math and science. It's about geography. It connects our past with the present, and it commemorates our connection with art and with our city.
Albuquerque, I get lonesome and blue.
A few years ago, I got interested in the centers of things, and I wanted to find where the geographic center of New Mexico was. So I got some people who know how to do that, and they found it for me, and I went there and wrote about it and had a great time. And Cliff Wilkie, who was with the city at the time, read about it, and he started thinking, where the center of the city of Albuquerque is. And so the city staff got busy and they discovered where it was, and he let me know, and we went out and found it, and I wrote about that and brought along a marker, which was 2 pieces of black duct tape, and I made a big X on the sidewalk where it was, which is not very ceremonious.
The arts people up on the 6th floor, they picked up on this and thought, wow, or actually several people did that, because you know, this is good publicity for the city, and it's kind of fun stuff that everyone likes. So they wanted to go further with it, and they got the notion together of positioning the center point through time.
Oh, the original marker was just going to commemorate the center of the city, which at that point was 2010, and they had done this work. And by time we learned about the project and thought about moving forward with it, we realized that if we went back and looked at where the center of the city was 100 years ago, we could tie it in with the Centennial project and make it a project about 1912 and about 2012. And it turned out it was right at Central and 4th Street, which is a pretty significant location because that's where Route 66 and Route 66 crosses itself, the new alignment and the old alignment of Route 66. So once we discovered that, then it became a really fun, exciting project to make it about 2 different places in time. And so we thought that would be great because then we could make 2 marks in the ground. And that's when we came up with the idea of doing like a manhole cover and doing a design competition and making them unique.
When I first started thinking about the center, it was back in, I think it was 2008, and we were in the midst of the partisan presidential election, and we were extremely split, and I was driving around and listening to right-wing radio and left-wing radio and everybody fighting, and I don't know, it just spurred in me an idea that there must be a center somewhere still, even though we are so divided, and that's just kind of how it came about.
Un canto que traigo muy dentro del alma, lo canto a mi estado, mi tierra natal.
Albuquerque, before the railroad came in 1880, was a series of villages. Old Town was one of the villages, Los Griegos and Atrisco across the river, Alameda up in the North Valley. These were all villages that had a common heritage, but were separated physically from each other. And the population was quite small, just a few thousand people among all of those places. And of course, the biggest central public place was the Old Town Plaza, right in front of San Felipe Church. Before the railroad came, Albuquerque was certainly dominated by agricultural industry. Not only was there fruit and vegetable growing in the valley here, but you had out in the Estancia Valley and to a great extent on the mesas to the east and west of town, the grazing business of cattle and sheep. The Estancia Valley in particular had a lot of sheep ranching going on. And so the products of that ranching, the wool, the hides, and obviously the meats, were brought into Albuquerque for processing. It was certain that the railroad was going to come to Albuquerque, but it wasn't certain that it was going to have the impact on Albuquerque that it did. And that has to do with the railroad's choice of Albuquerque as a place to develop a major depot and related buildings, depot and hotel, I should say, and also its shops for the locomotives. The shops were critical to the operation of the railroad. The railroad first looked at Bernalillo as a site for these facilities, and because of a very high price on the land up there, they looked south to Albuquerque, where a group of people in town here who had already been here in business for a while, name of Huning, Hazeldine, and Stover, joined forces with the railroad in something called the New Mexico Land Company, and they basically purchased land to create a town site and land for the facilities of the railroad. So the effect of the railroad coming to Albuquerque and coming down the east side of the floodplain was that we ended up with two towns, and they actually called them Old and New Albuquerque, Old Town and New Town. And New Town was this railroad-related grid of streets that was developed much like a small downtown would be in the Midwest or even back east. And the architecture tended to look more like those towns as well than the architecture in Old Town did. So the railroad was a two-way track, so to speak, a two-way road. It brought people in here with ideas, with capital, and it also provided a way to get the things produced locally out of here. It's important to remember or to recognize that the locomotive shops the railroad built here were a major employer. They were the major employer in the city until the lumber company took over. The lumber company apparently provided about 850 jobs in the first decade of the 20th century. The railroad hadn't quite gotten that big yet in terms of shops jobs. But later on, come 1920, the Santa Fe Railway expanded its shops complex here. And they were then employing in the range of 900 people, which is a lot of people in a town of the size of Albuquerque of those days. Apparently the 1891 town site designation was for a town, and that in 1895 it was converted or reestablished as a city, the city of Albuquerque as opposed to the town of Albuquerque. Before the city of Albuquerque was founded, there was county government in effect all over, and it applied to both the new town and the old town. Well, population-wise in 1880, I believe it was on the order of 3,000 people, and I don't have command of all of these numbers, but by 1910, the census recorded about 13,000 people in Albuquerque and in Old Town. Albuquerque has always been a cosmopolitan place, that it's never been dominated by one ethnic group, and that's made it all the more interesting.
Are filled with beans and jerky. I have rambled up and down. Now I
Old Town did not want to be part of New Town. They liked their meandering streets and their adobe buildings. So Old Town fought annexation. And then somehow in 1949, it got easier to annex stuff. And so Old Town was annexed kicking and screaming. And there was a big controversy about the annexation of Old Town. And the minute it was annexed, then somebody went, oh, look, that'd be a great tourist place, wouldn't it? I think you can sum up the growth of Albuquerque in 5 letter T's, and that would be tourism, tuberculosis, Tingley, transportation, and technology. To me, those are the 5 critical issues that made this town what it is now. From the very beginning, it was a transportation because the river went through here and the canyon, and so it was always a crossroads. Then later, of course, that would be enhanced by the 2 Route 66s that ran through here. Tourism really picked up with the coming of the railroad, which began to come in 1880, and the Santa Fe Railway wanted to enhance tourism. They wanted to substitute the great American Southwest for Europe, and so they began to push this notion of the exotic cultures, the Spanish culture, the Indian culture, the tricultural notion, which is a tourist invention. That's not true. We've always been highly multicultural. Then we have the rise of the great hoo-ha culture of Route 66 with the curio shops, the Indian trading posts, the jewelry stores, the little mom and pop motels, all of these things that began to grow along Central in response to Route 66. Huge economic boost. Tuberculosis was the worst disease in the world in the 19th and 20th centuries, but the only treatment they knew was to put them in an elevated place with high altitude, which we have an abundance of, lots of sunshine, which we have an abundance of, rest, and good food. Now, you would either get better or die. So it was kind of the luck of the draw. A lot of people got better and stayed here and contributed to the community, and a lot of people died. All the little towns wanted to grow their town, and they started printing booster booklets, which encouraged people with tuberculosis to come. And it would say, come to Albuquerque where the sick get well and the healthy prosper. But the idea was to bring them in, because not only would you bring in the sick, you would bring in their family, you would bring in doctors, nurses, ancillary staff, all of the things that it takes to run a tuberculosis hospital. So tuberculosis has a huge, it underpins the medical community we have now. Clyde Tingley came in 1910. He became a ward alderman, and that's how he got into politics. They never had children. They adopted Albuquerque as their child. And they were always out driving around looking at things to be improved, and he was a great city booster, and he was an old-time politician. So it was government by Clyde and not by democracy. And Clyde Tingley was a big proponent of parks. And because of him, we have a park in almost every subdivision. He started the zoo. That was one of his pet projects. He turned the city dump into a full-size water park, which ran all the way from Central down past the country club, which is now restored, and it's a fishing pond. So we still have Tingley Beach. If you don't know who Clyde Tingley was, you don't know anything about New Mexico or Albuquerque. I use the T for technology because after World War II, the technology really began to pour in here because of the Los Alamos, the Manhattan Project. We got a contract to have an Army airfield, which eventually has become Kirtland Base, and Sandia Labs. So scientists began to come to do technology and nuclear research. We had more PhDs per capita than any other city in the world for a while. People would be stationed here temporarily during the war, decide we like it, we like the sunshine, we like the open air, we like Albuquerque, we're coming back. And they would come back to live or to retire. So the rising technology attracted yet another group of people. After the tuberculosis people came, then we had all these technological people who came and by and large settled in the Northeast Heights.
And in just about a week, I'll see the town of Albuquerque.
I suppose I could have done this all myself, but I thought it's always more fun to spread these things around. So I got a hold of the GIS group because it kind of made sense. And they're in charge of, they keep track of the boundaries of the city and where subdivisions go and where all sorts of stuff goes that's important to the city. So they knew where the boundaries were.
When you get into a really difficult shape, something that's not real symmetrical, think of the outline of Florida, or the outline of Texas, or the outline of the United States for that matter. You can't just draw lines and find the center. So there's a concept called the centroid, and that's where you're finding the center point of a complex shape. That is a long mathematical formula that if you had to do it by hand would take a long, long time. Luckily for us, our software will find the centroid of a complex shape. Another way to think of it, though, is with a complex shape is, say if you cut the shape of the United States out of cardboard or sheet metal, it would be that point on that shape where it would balance if you put it on a needle or post or something. If an annexation, say, that's 800 feet wide, like recently we had one that was about that. It was a good, at its widest point, it was about 800 feet wide. It was down in the southeast part of the city. And it was just a little triangle that extended on to kind of the south and over in the east part of the city. That changed the center of the city by about 30 feet as the crow flies. So the current center now, that it was about 30 feet away from that point back in the summer. In 1912, the Albuquerque was pretty small. It was just, I think, 2.5, 3 square miles, something like that. It was pretty small. And it was, for the most part, pretty square. It was kind of a rectangle with a little bit of a boot hill at the bottom, I think. We had data, again, GIS data, mapping data, that showed what the boundaries were of that first original town site. So we just used our GIS software to locate that.
Qué ciudad tan bonita, con tu nombre que tienes de rey.
I was interested and inspired to do this project because of the center of the city concept, and that this will be a place marker. I tried to come up with a concept that brought in geography and was also iconic, kind of like a logo. Well, I guess I wanted to convey the idea of how central this place marker is, using the A as the first letter of Albuquerque as sharp points kind of pointing to north, south, east, and west. And when you see the marker, I'd like people to stop and first realize that the manhole, or this thing, is not quite a manhole. It's something special and it's intricate, and that it's actually art, and then to take a second look and appreciate its symbology and that you are in the center of Albuquerque. The 2012 one is the reverse relief of this, so whatever's recessed is raised on the other one. The designs are very detailed. There's font that's kind of thin, and there's tick marks on the circle of the compass where the degrees are, and so they're very narrow, and in the process of casting and molding, those details may be lost.
We didn't think there would be artists that would really have the skills to be able to cast a large metal manhole cover. So we found Nathan, who helped us think through the fabrication of these manhole covers. We talked about iron or steel, and it turns out that he knew the folks at Highlands University who could cast iron. And more conversation, the next thing you know, we're recycling used manhole covers from the city of Albuquerque, and it just turned into a great, truly made in New Mexico project.
Gonna burn up the track, 'cause I'm on my way back to A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E.
Because we're hand doing everything. This isn't an industrial foundry, you know, these are artists and what, you know, and not everything always works out well. Sometimes we have, it's called miscast or cold shot, meaning that there's spaces that don't fill, you know, and of course we've done everything we can to try to ensure that these come out as successful as possible. There is some of the manhole covers that the city gave us, and what we broke some of that up, and it is in these charges, but it's mixed in there. We can't throw all of those thick chunks in there at one time. And so when we pour into the two of them, it'll fill the runners into the disc there, and then we'll see metal come up out of these holes. And if we don't see metal coming up, we'll at least see some smoke coming up out of there.
We're going to melt iron in what's called a cupola furnace. We're going to pour those at the end because the furnace gets hotter the longer it runs, and I need to have a big load of really hot metal for these plaques, okay, because they're about 3/4 of an inch thick and what is that dimension, 24, 26 inches across. Okay? And so we have to do that 2 times back to back. Okay? That's really what I'm thinking about. Yeah, there's a lot of other molds here, but I'm thinking about the molds at the end where we need to have a big load, hot metal, you know, to get these plaques done proper. The things that iron casting does is that it brings people together. Okay, we got people here from Santa Fe and from Tucumcari. Oftentimes we've had people here from Britain, from all over, from every coast of America. You know, it brings people together. It creates community among artists because we need to have this group of people working together to accomplish this.
Pour it hard! Pour it! Pour it!
Pour it! Pour it!
Pour! Pour! All right!
Tremendously. Yeah, I can't wait to, break it open and see, But that won't be until tomorrow. Yeah, I'm thrilled. Couldn't be happier.
I'm the one she loves best. She got a lot of mail from me.
The original latitude and longitude for the original 1912 center of the city of Albuquerque was 35 degrees, 5 minutes, and 2 seconds north, 106 degrees, 39 minutes, and 6 seconds west. Now, the center of the city is 35 degrees, 6 minutes, 19 seconds north, 106 degrees, 38 minutes, and 46 seconds west. And as it turns out, that's just 1.5 miles as the crow flies from each other. The original center of the city is south from the current center of the city by 1.5 miles.
That's the Albuquerque polka.
As far as people walking over it and looking at it, I think that the part of public art is that it engages a dialogue, whether it be good or bad, at least that art is involved and not separated from the public. It's not hidden away, and that it should engage discussion, and people shouldn't be afraid to disagree or get in arguments over it. Hopefully not trip over it.
Because then we could see over time if it wears, almost like a science experiment to see, because Nathan and I had been discussing what's going to happen in the future with this thing and, being walked on and everything. Maybe we can give some money to some city employees to shine it up a little.
It's great, dude.
I don't know, maybe some gum would help. Spit.
Interestingly, I think that my finding the centers has run its course. I was just thinking today, I think we're kind of done with our centers. We've done Albuquerque, we've done New Mexico. Somebody could call up from, I don't know, Silver City and want to find their center, and I think I'd pass. I think we've done enough, and this is an incredibly fitting tribute.
Happy birthday, New Mexico, and happy birthday to everybody else whose birthday it might be today. So, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
That's the Albuquerque polka. Now that we have sung this little song, there's just one thing more to do. Spell it backwards, it's a lot of fun, and I'll sing along with you. B-U-Q-R-U-Q-U-B-L-A, B-U-Q-R-U-Q-U-B-L-A, B-U-Q-R-U-Q-U-B-L-A. That's the Albuquerque polka.